Good evening. We are glad to welcome you here in our event in the Center for the Municipal History. And today we have a very special event, which is not a lecture, it's more like a talk. And before I introduce the idea and our guests, I would like to mention that we have a simultaneous translation in place. So if you need a translation from Ukrainian to Ukrainian, please take your headphones. І для тих, хто не говорить українською, у нас є синхронний переклад. Отже, будь ласка, якщо ви хочете почути переклад, будь ласка, візьміть навушники. Ми будемо говорити більшістю англійською, але якщо буде щось українською, ви можете також взяти навушники та послухати. And let me switch to Ukrainian language again. And today's event is one of the series of the events that support the exhibition, which is called Returning Home. It's the event held together with the Urban City Center, and it's together with the photographer Vladimir Pochalski, and it was an exhibition dedicated to the animals, the pictures of the animals, so-called the portraits of the animals. And this return topic is related to one of the projects of this artist who took the pictures and documented the experiment, which was carried out with cranes in the 30s, when the cranes from a small villages next to the Veliki Moste town, they were brought to another places in the foreign countries, and they were monitored if they were able to find a place, their homes. And yes, we know that the cranes, they always find their way back, and they usually find their nests at their home places where they grew up. This experiment, I think it's a little bit harsh if you think about it, but it was definitely interesting. And the scientists still try to understand what makes these birds to return. And from one side, it's an exhibition about the biology, but from another perspective, it's a metaphor, which is very, very important for many people today, including Vladimir Pochalski, who had to leave his hometown, Lviv, and never come back to his native places. But it's always also very important for lots of contexts which take place in history of Ukraine, of Lviv, of this region, because this region was remarked by migration, and now, due to the war, we see lots of people fleeing, leaving the country, and lots of people also returning. And today we invited two of our guests, and I'm very happy to welcome them. It's Marla Raucher Osborn from California, and she's the founder of the organization Rohatyn Jewish Heritage, a Jewish heritage of Rohatyn, and she is entitled to preserve the Jewish heritage in Rohatyn, but she's currently living in Lviv. But due to some family matters, and we will talk about them today, and I'm showing you her website, the Rohatyn Jewish Heritage, and I welcome you to check this website after the lesson. And our second guest is Areta Kovalska from Chicago. She wasn't also born in Ukraine, but she has long-term family history related to Ukraine, and she came here, she lives here, she works here, and she founded another great project that I think many of you interested in the history of Lviv and Ukraine. It's a project Forgotten Galicia. It's a website and a blog in the social media where Areta shares about different forgotten places of Galicia. And also we will have the discussion. It's not only the lecture, it's a discussion. I will first start with a few questions to our guests, and we will talk for 40 minutes, and then you will have the possibility to ask your questions. And if you follow our projects online, I think you will be interested in asking your
and
questions
I'm
in real
English,
life.
And I would like to ask Areta to be first and to say about yourself. What's your story? Mm-hmm. How did you come to Lviv? When did you come? And what was your motivation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I was born in Chicago. My grandparents were refugees from Ukraine who left at the end of World War II. And so when they left at the end of World War II and spent some time in Germany in displaced persons camps before they moved to Chicago, which is where my mother and I was born. On my mother's side, my grandparents are from Argentina, from Galicia. On my father's side, my grandfather is from Galicia, but my grandmother was from central Ukraine. And so growing up in Chicago in the Ukrainian community, I was quite active. I went to Ukrainian Saturday school. I was in Plast, did Ukrainian dancing, Ukrainian Catholic church, and so I was very involved in the Ukrainian community. And I think it's worth mentioning that my grandparents and that community, that wave of Ukrainian immigrants that left at the end of World War II, these were mostly from Western Ukraine, and they were a lot of them were intelligentsia, patriotic Ukrainians, and so they left more for political reasons. And so that means when they came to Chicago, when they came to North America, for them it was very important to pass on Ukrainian language and culture and traditions to their children and their grandchildren. And so that's kind of the community that I grew up in, and I guess you could say it was fairly successful because in 2011 I moved to Ukraine, the home of my grandparents, the home that they could never return to. And so I've been living in Ukraine since 2011, except for a short while I spent in Krakow at the beginning of the full-scale invasion. When I moved to Ukraine, I had the intention of staying permanently, but I wasn't sure if it would work out. I didn't know if I would find work. I didn't know if I'd get permanent residency, etc. But everything worked out, and I've been working in the IT sphere the last many years. And so after I moved to Ukraine, I started coming across old ghost signs. These are these old hand-painted signs that you can find on the sides of old buildings. In the case of Lviv, these are multilingual signs in Polish, in Yiddish, Ukrainian, German. And I was very fascinated by these remnants, by these ghost signs, because for a couple of reasons. For one, it was kind of a reminder of the multicultural city that Lviv once was before World War II. And also just the fact that you can find these direct traces, these physical traces of the past, and you can kind of connect with the history that way through physical remnants. And after discovering these ghost signs, I realized that there's all these other remnants of the past that you can find in the urban landscape of Lviv. So also old street signs that are in Polish, or obsolete elements of infrastructure, for example, boot scrapers or guard stones that protect buildings against horse carriage wheel damage, etc. So there's basically all these traces that you can find in the historical landscape, and I started collecting them and decided to create a website to share the photos, share my research about it. And from that's how the whole project started, and it kind of grew into this project to write about the history of Galicia. Specifically looking at the architecture and urban kind of physical remnants. But also for me it was important to focus not only on Ukrainian history, but also to look at the history of the Polish history, the Jewish history, German history, and yeah, that's basically how that started.
Thank you so much. And now I move to Marla, and please tell you about your job. And I forgot to mention that Marla is not alone. She's with her husband, Osborn, who is sitting over there, hiding. Okay, so how did it all start with you?
Actually, I'm now going to shift based on some stuff that Areta said, because the overlap is amazing but offset by like 40 years on our families. I was raised in California, in Los Angeles. I moved to San Francisco when I was in my 20s. I went to law school, I practiced law, met my husband. That's its own story. And he's not Jewish. And I was raised in a very secular family. All of my grandparents were, well, my parents were first-born generation Americans. But my mother's family were from points of central Ukraine and Moldova, but my father's side was 100% Galician, and as it turns out, Ternopil, Lviv, Ivano-Frankivsk, and just over the border in Przemysl. But what I absolutely find remarkable about Areta and our overlap is my family left here just at the start of World War I, and they went to New York and they went to Chicago. And my mother's side, which went to Chicago, these were the central Ukrainian family from Podilsky and Kamenets-Podilsky and Moldova. Where they settled is today Ukrainian Village in Chicago. And I find that absolutely fascinating because there absolutely was this tendency for the first generation Americans to reproduce in America what they were actually leaving. And so, for instance, my dad's Galicianer side, which considered themselves Austrian, they settled in an area of New York that was predominantly German-speaking. They were German-speaking. Austrian, very, very assimilated. Whereas my mother's side in Chicago, half her family, I never understood a word they said. They looked different. They ate differently, they looked like they walked out of a 19th century shtetl, and they had strong accents from Yiddish and Russian and Romanian, actually. So I really didn't have a lot of interaction, but the upshot is that, like you, in 2011, we made our first trips here, which we'll talk about prior to that, but we had an opportunity in 2011 to take an apartment here for 3 months, which we did, and that was sort of the door opened to Rohatyn, which is where my grandmother was born, my father's mother. And from there, I say, I didn't come here looking for a project, but heritage found me, and we'll explore that tonight. But the responsibility I felt toward the Rohatyn Ukrainian community asking me, as the first Jew who had shown up in a while, well, what do you want to do? Ended up having a profound effect. And in 2016, we settled here permanently. We formed a Ukrainian NGO, Rohatyn Jewish Heritage. Through that, we got residency and the ability to stay more than 90 days, of course. And it also gave us a certain legitimacy for working with the city of Rohatyn, with local schools, the librarians, and even projects here in Lviv. And we're huge fans of Forgotten Galicia.
I'm also huge fans of your passion.
Okay, thank you for starting. And so the second question I may have, I guess Ukrainian diaspora story and Jewish diaspora story and their memories of Ukraine may be very different. And actually, your families left what was then Poland and Galicia, but you came back to Ukraine. And what memory, how memory about these places was cherished here? Did you hear the word Ukraine? Did you hear the word Galicia? How do you feel? Because it's amazing that you have this website which is called Forgotten Galicia, and you also identify yourself as Galicianer, so it's very local, also very local memory. So what can you say about how it was preserved in your memory, and also what changed when you came here? What struck you? What was surprising?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I grew up going to Ukrainian Saturday school, and it was in Plas, so I knew a lot about Ukraine growing up, but also something that I realized maybe when I moved to Ukraine that I didn't realize when I was growing up, that my Ukrainian upbringing was very Galician. Coming to Ukraine the first few times, hearing the current standard Ukrainian was very different than the Ukrainian I grew up with, and I didn't really know a lot of that growing up. So again, I thought that all of Ukraine was kind of like Galicia. I thought all Ukraine was Greek Catholic, which is not the case, and so I knew a lot about Ukraine, but it was very specifically about Galicia. So this was what changed when I started coming to Ukraine, realizing that Ukraine is much bigger than just Galicia. Language. I grew up not only speaking about Galician and current standard Ukrainian, but also there was no Russian, so I didn't know about how much Russian there was in Ukrainian at that point. So Yeah, so I guess it was just very Galician. So I knew a lot about Ukraine, and it was mostly through school. My grandparents, growing up, they didn't share a lot of stories about their life in Ukraine. Maybe because I was still really young at that time, and then by the time I was old enough to want to ask them myself, it was too late. They had passed away. So it was more just kind of learning just this very Ukrainian, again, this Galician-focused Ukrainian history culture that I knew, and it was a bit different once I came here.
And Marla?
My story is quite different. Despite having a university education from UCLA in political science and Eastern Europe governments, I knew nothing about Ukraine. This was a period in the 1980s of Cold War, and we studied Soviet satellites and other things, but the word Ukraine never came up at all. From a Jewish perspective, I'm maybe not always the best person to respond on this because, again, my household was very secular, which is kind of typical for the West Coast. But I did hear, interviewing a lot of relatives on both sides of my family as the family historian, Rohatyn doesn't exist anymore. And telling me something didn't exist was the fastest way to make me interested in it. I thought, how is that even possible? People disappear. I understand the Holocaust, or I thought I did. But how does a place disappear? And of course, that's completely wrong. The topic here today is, where is my home? I don't really have a great reply on that because it's a very fluid concept for us. Jay and I, since 2000, have lived outside the United States. But we've lived for long periods and short periods, from 3 months to 5 years. And whether it's 3 years in UK, or 5 years in France, or 2.5 years in Poland, or 3 months in Israel, or 3 months in Argentina, home, I'm not a stork, I guess is the thing. And when we do go back to America, I feel like my grandparents probably felt. Jay and I walk around Whole Foods and other places going, wow, look at all this abundance. I knew about Galicia, but only as a kind of identity thing. And I'm really embarrassed to say that because my Galician side of the family always talked about being Austrian, they emphasized the Austrian over the Galician, I actually wrote a letter to the Austrian consulate because I couldn't find Rohatyn on the map. And this is while I was a lawyer in San Francisco, so it's really kind of embarrassing to get this letter back, and they said, it does exist, but it's not in Austria, it's in Ukraine. So that kind of threw my world way off for a while. Anyway.
I had a question about your projects, you also are welcome ask questions one another because each other, because you sit here and we don't have to make this round all the time. My question was about your project, because your stories are also parallel, not only because of your background and coming here, but also of this active work, something active that you do for cherishing memory and for spreading the knowledge. I discovered so many things about Galicia about this area from your website, from your text. And can you tell us more about it? How was it, and about, if you can say already about the reception of the project, how they are perceived? What is the audience of Forgotten Galicia, and what is the audience of Jewish Rohatyn? Did you manage to create some communities around it?
Yeah, so I'd say that my audience is all from across the whole world, and I think part of it is because I'm also writing in English, and that also opens up a wider audience. But I have noticed that it's just not only Ukrainians that are following my project. There's also a lot of Jewish, Polish, German people from all over the world, the U.S., Eastern or Western Europe, who have a connection to Galicia. Oftentimes, people are writing me and saying that, oh, they just discovered that their grandfather was from Galicia. It could be Polish, it could be German, some Jewish connection to the region. And so I think that it has created this kind of very multicultural community of people that are following it, and I'm really happy that that happened. Also because sometimes I get interesting comments, or people share their stories about their connections to Galicia and wanting to learn more, and so yeah, it's quite diverse, the people that follow the project.
Yeah, and to Marla, I remember last semester a student of mine who was doing a research project about not about Rohatyn, about Kolomyia. She found some information on your website. She contacted Jay, and she did it all without me. It's like I was not recommending your website. She found it by herself, and it was very useful for her. And I understood that your project accumulates the knowledge that was not accumulated in any other place.
Yeah, no, I'm really happy to hear that. Jay's our map expert, and so that crosses over in a million different areas. And when we started the website in, I don't know, 2012 or 2013, it was very important for us to make it bilingual in Ukrainian and English, because we absolutely viewed Rohatyn Jewish heritage as much a project for Jewish descendants of Rohatyn as for the current modern Ukrainian community of Rohatyn, because it was remarkable how little access they had to information that is readily available to English speakers. So the website was put up bilingually, and we've had a number of teachers and students contact us from Rohatyn, and they would do papers or they would do presentations, and nothing is more rewarding than to hear about that for me.
The question, I don't know, maybe it's too personal, but you came here and you spent here quite a lot of time, and do you feel that you belong here, or do you feel that you belong less to the place where you are from? What's this question of belonging? And you said that the feeling of home is fluid for you now, and what does it mean?
Yeah, so for me, I definitely feel like I belong here on a lot of different levels, and I do feel like it has become my home, not only my ancestral home, but I feel like it's also become my physical home in a lot of meanings. And I remember the distinct moment when I had that kind of feeling, when I felt that Ukraine and Lviv was my home. It was maybe about 4 years after I moved to Lviv. I remember us going to Chicago for vacation, and I remember thinking the first time that I'm not going home anymore to where my parents live, where I grew up. I felt finally that Lviv was my home. I had work here, I had a life here, I had friends here, and so for me it was kind of this distinct moment where I realized that Lviv had become my home. I feel like it is my home. Chicago, it's still the U.S. Of course, it's an important place. That was the home of my childhood. It's where my family lives. That's where my friends live. It's really the country that formed me. But I would consider Ukraine to be my home now.
Yeah, I can't disagree. I'd say the only barrier is language. Despite the fact that we've taken private Ukrainian language lessons, I struggle with it. I struggled with it when we lived in Poland. I struggle with it here, and that's a problem because it means I can't go to films and I can't read in Ukrainian. I can only read what's been translated. And in order to really insert yourself in a culture, you need to have the language. And there's only one other place I've ever lived that is outside the U.S. that I've chosen to return to. One of them is Paris and the other is Lviv. And almost from the get-go, and I'm reminded that even walking here tonight, I walk past two places that have historic significance for my Galician family. One is the school that's over here around the corner, and the other is a building a couple blocks away. So these reminders are everywhere. Even where our apartment is 1 block away, one of my Rohatyn family members lived when she was a student at the university in the interwar period, and we walk past it probably every day. So in many ways I feel my connection here is much stronger. We go back to California or the US, and I don't even have that much sentimentality about it.
Mm-hmm. And I think same with me. I also know places in Lviv where I connect to my family history, and that also makes it even stronger, that connection. So also think about it a lot when I'm walking through Lviv, and I know that family lived here or some other connection. So that's also very powerful.
Also, I'm looking around for your stuff. So
okay.
when you put a new ghost sign up, Jay and I are out the door the next morning. So.
Yeah, I guess you both have more connection to Lviv than I do, because my family didn't live here before my family is from the village, and I don't have anything familiar in the cityscape, and it's amazing that you have it. And one thing that also is common for both of you is that if you came for the first time in 2011, it means that you had experience with, first of all, Ukrainian Revolution, Maidan, and then with the war in Donbass, and then the full-scale war, and you remained, and I know Marla writes a lot every time something happens, something bad Marla is reacting. And we had this conversation with you in Chicago about how this war resonated with your family experiences, with your family memories, with this trauma, and how did war change your living here, or perhaps made you think differently about this place?
So for me, I think that when the full-scale invasion started, it kind of solidified my. I kind of felt even stronger that Lviv. So I think it made me realize even more strongly that Lviv was my home and Ukraine was my home, because I remember when the war started, a lot of people were asking me, why don't I move back to the States? And I remember thinking that this is my home now. I don't feel like Chicago is my home. And I remember thinking, if I can't be in Lviv, then I want to be at least in Galicia, in Poland, maybe in Krakow. And that is where I ended up for a few months at the beginning of the war, and I did feel very familiar. I felt almost at home in Krakow. And in some ways, actually, I felt even more home in Krakow than in Lviv because of some of the things that I grew up with in the Galician community in Chicago. So just a couple of quick examples. So when I went to Ukrainian school, we had to pass these exams called matura. And in Ukraine, when growing up, I thought this was something that's very common in Ukraine, that everyone goes through matura. But it turns out that you don't have that in Ukraine anymore, but you do have that in Poland. So I remember when I was in Poland talking to friends and they were mentioning matura, I felt like, oh, this is part of my Ukrainian upbringing. Or even pampushki z rożeю. Growing up in Chicago, every Sunday after church, we would eat pampushki z rożeju, and I was surprised that in Ukraine and Lviv you don't have them everywhere, but you do have them everywhere in Krakow. Basically, in every corner there's a bakery that has it. So I felt very good in Krakow, but it was almost like home, but it wasn't quite home. So I was glad that I was able to come back to Lviv. But when it comes to resonating with like family stories, I mean, of course, I started thinking a lot about my family's experience during World War II, having to leave their home, having to, a lot of the same things that I had to deal with, deciding whether or not to stay, deciding what to bring if I do leave. And I know these are exactly the things that my grandmother and my ancestors were thinking. They had to make that decision. I know that they were also, it was not a very easy decision for them, and I also know that they had to think of what they could bring because they couldn't bring all of their belongings. So a lot of these things that a lot of Ukrainians, of course, we're thinking about now, but these are the things that they experienced, and so they ended up going west, and I did end up, in a way, retracing their steps because I did go leave for a few months and went west, and so that was, thinking a lot about their experiences as I was experiencing this many decades later. But one more thing that I've been thinking a lot about in the last couple of weeks, I'm thinking also about physical homes. I know that like houses. So I know that, for example, the building where my family lived in Domowroty was destroyed, was burned down during World War II, and I thought about it a lot after the attack on Lviv, because the building on Kovalska 44 was the building that my family lived in before World War II. So, and it was very much destroyed. So I was thinking a lot about, again, this destruction of family homes. But and one more note about that. So the family that lived in Kovalska 44 before World War II, they were Polish, because my great grandfather was Polish. His cousin, he had the house built, and they lived there with their family until World War II. And I know a lot about that house and about that family because I'm connected with the grandson of Ludwig Hirsch, who built the house. And I know that in 1939, when they came, the Soviets looted the apartment and took all their valuables. But I also know that Polish family also had to leave Galicia. Had to leave Eastern Galicia, which had been their home for generations, just as most Poles were deported or left at the end of World War II. So again, there's these parallels of, so both my Ukrainian and Polish sides had to leave during World War II. So there's a lot of, again, kind of repetition, parallels between what happened, my family experienced then, and what Ukrainians are experiencing now, and also with this, again, this destruction of physical houses. So even if they did come back, my family that left during World War II, their house wasn't there. In this case of the Hirsch house, so that the house survived World War II, but it didn't survive the current war. So thinking a lot about family history.
Yeah, I saw in the last things that you posted in your blog was about this house on Kovalska, and it has to be very, very. The history is in itself very, very sad. And for you.
I don't want to spend a lot of time on because I'll just get too upset. But obviously there are huge parallels between what Jewish families in Galicia went through in World War II. Our website, the very first news article, we have a news section on the website. The very first news article that we posted after the full-scale invasion was on the parallels between what happened in Raucher when the Germans invaded and what's happening in Ukraine right now. And that includes, destroying cultural institutions and breaking community bonds and just trying to break down culture in a way so people can be more easily manipulated. I think, this is just too emotional. For me, I would say that I too have been thinking a lot about the physicality of home and the sort of fragility of home. We happened to be in California when the full-blown invasion happened. We were scheduled to come back here on the 14th of February, and we decided to postpone coming back for 2 weeks, and then the invasion, and then we postponed, and like Areta, we said, we're just not getting any accurate information. We're having Skype calls and Zoom calls with friends on the ground, but it's not meshing well with what we're seeing on the news. So we decided to get closer to home, and we spent a couple months in Germany before realizing that it was time to go home. But in the meantime, our home, our apartment here, we gave permission to our landlady to make it available to temporarily displace people from the east, which we had a general idea was something like 5 or 6 families, mostly from Kharkiv. However, 2 weeks ago we met with our landlady, and she said, okay, now I'm going to actually tell you how many people were in your apartment. We had 90 people that passed through our apartment in 2.5 months, and that's inconceivable for me. It's just too hard to even think about.
when we try to think about something more optimistic and about all this resilience that we have now in Ukraine, that we are part of it, you are part of it because you are sitting here and listening to the lecture. And you spent here for some time and you contributed to this preservation of memory. Do you see any positive changes in how Ukrainians start to see Ukrainian and Galician history differently? Especially, maybe this is a question to Marla, because you are bringing something very new. Both of you are bringing something very new because you have this multicultural perspective and you have this Jewish perspective that was absent for so many years and not present. So perhaps you wanna share your observations if you have them.
I feel like I've observed that people are becoming more interested in learning about history and culture of Ukraine. I mean, across Ukrainians themselves, but also abroad, people want to learn more about Ukraine. So there's definitely, it's been a push for people to, all different kinds of people to want to learn more about everything. Again, history, culture. So that's what I've seen in the last few years.
I would say from our perspective, if it wasn't for this fucking invasion, things were really moving in a fabulous direction for us. I mean, I look back on statements I made. We made our first trip here actually in 2008, and it was awful. But by the time we came back in 2011, it was a whole different experience, and then going forward from there. And using social media to talk about when we were going to be in Raucher meant that people they actually sought us out when we were there. And, I said some really naive things early on about, empty spaces and missing people. And Jay used to like to say the Jews are like dinosaurs. Once in a while you find a footprint, but that's about it, and they're otherwise gone. Everybody's heard about them, but they've not seen them. But it turns out that's not true at all. There is memory that has existed in Raucher. We've had so many young people born since independence who know we're there, and they come and they want to talk. They want to talk about stories they heard from their grandparents. They want, and just it's there. For some reason, I thought it was all gone, and this idea that a lot of Americans, at least Jewish Americans, have that there's nothing there is so off, because, okay, the physical heritage in many cases is missing or very badly damaged, but the memory of the people that live there still, there's a thread of this there, and the younger people all want to talk about it. They're asking their grandparents, they want to talk to us about it, and the saddest, one of the really sad things is where we're at now, because I feel like we're on this really wonderful trajectory with students and teachers and librarians and the new museum in Raucher to do projects like that showed where the Ukrainians, the Jews and the Poles all got together on market day. My family had a restaurant that was in town, and it was known to be open on Shabbat because, hell, that's when the business, So we had all these great ideas, and everything has just been cut short, like a life cut short. And I don't, at the moment, see going forward on that yet. And from a priority point of view, it doesn't even seem right, really, in some ways, because we need to win this war. Otherwise, all this is kind of meaningless.
Yes, but I don't think what you're doing now, even during these last years, is very meaningful. I just remember the story that connected somehow both of you. When I was a year ago, I went to Shred, that's a small town near Lviv, and I wanted to see Jewish cemetery. And the problem with Jewish cemetery in Shred, it's very overgrown with bushes and trees. And I was with two friends from Odessa. I was supposed to show them the location, and I was not able to show because it was very overgrown and panicked. And the first thing I did, I wrote to Areta on Instagram, and Areta, I saw you made a movie about Jewish cemetery in Moskalets. can you please tell me about the way Areta wrote me? Yes, you should find a bereza tree, very high one, and on the right side you will. And I found, so I was so happy. I was so grateful that I was not. I was able to show around my friends, and then I posted about threads, and then Marla replied to my post on Facebook and discussed all this story. And that's something amazing, because honestly speaking, I didn't hear a lot about Jewish heritage from Ukrainian diaspora, from people in Ukrainian diaspora, but here we have Areta who knows a lot about it, everything, and also we have Marla who lives here, and your perspective is so different from the usual perspective of people who just come visit for a short term, and it's something unbelievable, and you are making a huge difference with it. So before I pass microphone to the audience, I just wanted to ask both of you, do you have questions to each other? Is there something you wanted to always to ask?
I don't have top of my head. I have to think about this, but I do find it interesting, the Chicago connection between the three of us. Oh, yeah, right. That time in Chicago.
Okay, so я передаю слово вам, аудиторії, і я прошу вас, хто хоче задати питання, піднімайте руку, щоб взяти мікрофон, тому що перекладачка має чути вас через мікрофон, і ви можете задавати на тій мові, в якій вам зручно. So.
Thank you so much for a beautiful evening. It is so touching. I moved back to Ukraine in 2011 as well, although I had never left. And I find this fascinating because this calling to investigate your history and culture, and myself, Alicia, my grandma is from here, my old grandparents. But I started learning about it only, like when you did? So my question would be, what was your personal, this trigger that brings you back here over and over again? I also tried to live in UK and in Austria, in Vienna, and I'm coming back over and over again. And I do feel here this metaphysical powers and energies. We are not just to discuss as researchers or scientists. So I'm really, really interested in this personal triggers that keep bringing you. Is it the feeling? Is it the research? Is it the heritage that is calling? Thank you so much.
This is an interesting question. I used to actually lecture on this topic because, again, as I said earlier, the minute somebody said to me, well, it doesn't exist anymore, suddenly now I'm interested. For me, I was fascinated by the fact that in my grandmother's family, in the interwar period, she had aunts who were highly educated, and they became doctors and teachers, and I kind of thought, wow, that sort of contradicts my impression of what this part of the world was like in the 1920s. You know, that women are doctors, or they're teaching at the university, and they were educated in Vienna, and then they went to Krakow, and they were at Jagiellonian, and all this stuff. So that became a hook for me. And these two sisters, my grandmother's aunts, and they were very close in age to her because her father was the oldest kid, became sort of a map for my original travels in 2008 in this region. So I went to Vienna, I met with archivists at the university there, I went to Krakow, met with archivists there, and then Lviv, and it was really sort of following this academic breadcrumb trail that led to the bigger picture where I am today. So I would say family history brought me here, but something very specific, these two specific people. And because they were the only ones from my family that survived the Holocaust because they left for Palestine, whereas the rest of the family stayed. And they didn't have any children, these two sisters. So I was like the last line of this big family that had been in Rohatyn for generations. And so suddenly it also felt like a kind of responsibility you know?
Thank you.
And just briefly, yeah, for me it was just again the same. This family history kind of brought me here, but it's a lot of things that's keeping me here. It's the lifestyle, it's the project, it's work, it's friends. It's like I made a home here, but it was family history that brought me here. And in a way, I did kind of feel like I was returning for my grandparents who couldn't return. But a lot of things that are keeping me here that I really feel good here.
Thank you. I actually wanted to thank you for interesting thoughts and lecture. I came for some coffee and barista told me there is an interesting lecture here about home and stuff, and I'm like, oh wow, cool. And then I saw your name, Areta's name, and I'm like, okay, I'm going there. So as a representative of Crimean Tatar nation, I wanted to, I can relate a lot because the house of my great-grandfather, which he built with his own hands, it is now very close to Bakhchisaray's Khan Palace, which is also being destroyed by Russians. Just a few days ago they changed the stables doors to plastic ones. They are more than 1,000 years old, but more than 500 years old, but they changed it. And and that makes me thinking that, for example, our house is being occupied by 4 Russian families living there, and I'm just thinking about the home as a physical thing. If you think about it as a physical thing that can be destroyed. But what cannot be destroyed is our memory, yes, of how do we approach the fact that, for example, okay, some stinky Russians living there, yeah, but one day, even if we cannot get back the physical home because they are destroyed, they have destroyed it mostly, like there is nothing left in there except for walls that my grandfather built. But if we have the knowledge and the memory of how to rebuild it, maybe it is even more valuable than physical walls and stuff. But the thing that matters is the ground. So living here for 10 years in Galicia and living in between Galician people, I see a lot of connections with Crimean Tatar people in mentality. And there is a saying that swallows, the birds, always come home. So that makes swallows and it makes me think that okay, same like Crimean Tatars, they are ready to die for their ground, for coming back to their homeland. Same you guys, yeah? So you came back, you are always coming back to your homeland, and there is no way to explain it in any way. So my question is, what do you think about this memory, that it is more valuable than physical things that can be destroyed actually, but memory travels with us wherever we travel. So thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I agree 100%. I do think that it's the memory, it's the traditions, the culture that you pass on. That's what keeps it alive. And you can always rebuild any physical building or anything. But I think that's, and again, I think that's why when my grandparents, for them, it was so important to pass on the traditions to us because they didn't know if those traditions would remain in Ukraine, and even if they didn't have that physical home. To pass on the traditions and the memory of Ukraine, and maybe with the thought of returning home if it's possible. But so I think that I totally agree that that's very important. And so you put it very nicely. Yeah.
I agree. I think one thing that's very different in our American upbringings is a topic that's of interest to me, which relates to home. Is I say that for American Jews that their families ended up on the West Coast, like California, it's like a second immigration. Because if they went to California, they were intentionally leaving their first stop on the East Coast. And I still have family in both New York and Chicago and Philadelphia. They feel, I mean, they're technically family, but they feel very different. And for those on the West Coast, it was like an additional separation from the past. And people went west for a reason. They were either escaping other family members or some story, or they just wanted to start new. And so I didn't inherit a lot of traditions, but I took it upon myself to interview elderly people because I was just generally curious and wanting to document the family history. And so I've got lots of stories and stuff like that, but I wouldn't, you know, they didn't really include traditions. In fact, my family was kind of anti-traditional in a way, and I think that is very common for West Coast American Jews. And our families over time have married non-Jews, and we've adopted and brought in others. And so I like to think that it's one of the best things I can say about being an American, that as a West Coast American, we've been very embracing of all memory. And so I'm sentimental about memory, but I'm very unsentimental sometimes about family ties, I guess is the way to put it. And I've asked myself, you know, what would my Rohatyn grandmother think? Because she passed away a few years before we made our first trip here, and that was part of why we made our first trip here. I think she'd just be laughing, like, how ridiculous is that, you know? On the other hand, my dad, her son, thought it was wonderful. So, you know, but he was born in America. He wasn't born here.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to jump in and to advertise our next event, which will happen next week, and it will be about Crimean Tatars.
Yeah, really.
It's a part of the same series of lecture around the exhibition in Lviv Municipal Arts Center. So come here next Thursday at the same time.
Who's counting?
Martin Alexander Kessley.
Oh, nice. Very nice. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Natalie, and I'm spending 3 months in Lviv. I'm from France, but I grew up in Canada and London, and I lived in Toronto. And I'm with Index, the new institute which has been created just upstairs from here. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you very much for sharing these amazing experiences. And I think I have mostly a comment, and it's a very short story, and because I don't know what question to attach to my comment, actually. And my comment is, it's my short story. I'm 58 years old, and when I was 14, I made a very, very good friend in school, and she's still to this day my closest friend. And we met in eastern France. And her grandfather on her father's side of the family had origins here in Galicia, and he had moved to France between the 2 world wars, and his wife, who was also from this region, her family had moved to France at the very early parts of the 20th century. And my friend Anne, so the core part of the story is that her grandfather, her paternal grandfather, was arrested by the French militia during World War II and deported to Auschwitz. My friend's father was hidden as a child in France, and he was a baby. He survived, and the children of these grandparents survived. I discovered, this is like my closest friend, we're like sisters, and I discovered this story which she learned herself as a teenager. I discovered it over the years. It took actually a long time for me to hear the full story, and I'm not going to give you all the details. So she knows I'm here and spending time here, and one side of her family, I think the grandfather's side was on the Ukrainian side of the border, today's Ukrainian side of the border, and the grandmother's side was on the today's Polish side of the border, and I think in the region of Brody. But I've had this conversation with Sophia, and Sophia encouraged me to ask this question. I'm sorry if I'm very long, but I told Anne I'm here, and if you'd like me to go to some of these places, she's a civil servant in France. She can't come here. It's complicated for her. Would you like me to look into some of this? Would you like me to do some research? And would you like to try to come, maybe on holidays, not for work, but for... And her answer so far is, I can't. These are lands of, for me, these are lands of persecution, and I can't. And when I asked her recently again to give me the more details about the location of the places, she said, I'm not sure they're available now. And I just wanted to share this. I mean, I'm not sure that information is available to me. This is all very tenderly said. There's no, and I just wanted to share this, the impossibility of returning. The impossibility of returning even 3 generations later. I just wanted to share that if you have any comments.
I would actually like to comment. I'd like to comment on that because in my past life, I lectured quite a bit at international Jewish genealogy conferences, one of which was in Paris when we were living there, but also America and Israel and Poland. And this is a topic that comes up a lot, and sometimes it comes up very aggressively a lot, like how can you? And I'm going to be honest with you, with Jewish descendants of Raucher, and there is a group, an online group that has 300 plus members in a dozen different countries. There's been tension over the years with our work here. But there's also tension with religious Jews, because they don't want to talk to me as a woman, and I'm married to a non-Jew, so they certainly don't want to talk to my husband. And so they discount the work that we do. I understand exactly what your friend has said. We've done a lot of work with Yahad and Unum in Paris. In fact, work even in this region. And I personally had family that found themselves in Paris during the war. They were swept up in the sweeps, and they went to Drancy, and they went to Auschwitz. So I know about that, and 2 of their children were hidden in the countryside in part of the Catholic Underground Railroad system at the convents, and they survived, and they went to Israel. And when Jay and I went to Israel for a couple of months, I had plans to interview them. And at the very last minute, neither sister felt they could go through even talking to me. Not because of me and not because of what we were doing, but just because of even 75 years later, it was too difficult to discuss it. So I understand and I respect it, and you know, there's no answer for that. It's complex, and it's not for everyone to make the trip back here. When I worked in Poland at a Jewish Heritage Foundation for 2.5 years, I used to say to Jay, you know, God, the pushback I'm getting from Jewish descendants about anti-Semitism in Poland, and why would I go? Not one penny do I want to spend there. And I used to say to him, give them to me for one day. Let me take them to the schools. Let me take them to the Jewish cemeteries to meet the Polish people who are caring for some of the cemeteries. Let them see the positive side of this, of 2-3 generations after the war. And in a few cases, very few, but a few cases it happened. And it's happened a few times here, because the same sort of pushback, maybe even a little more intense with Ukraine, because it's less known to Americans and Israelis. Poland's in the European Union, so lots of people travel there now, but less so with Ukraine. a few have come, Rohatyn descendants, and I take them to Rohatyn, and they have had what I think is maybe, you know, an experience they wouldn't have had, and maybe they're thinking about things a little bit differently. I tell people we are not a Holocaust organization, but obviously it's because of the Holocaust that we have our projects of caring for 2 mass graves and 2 destroyed Jewish cemeteries. But it's not all about, for me, it's not all about death. It's about the time, the pre-war community that was there for 400 years. You know, multicultural, and the stories and the relationships. So it's not for everybody, but there it is.
So I know Marla's story pretty well, but I have a question for Areta. And the background on this is that when I was young in grammar school and high school, my parents moved around pretty often, but we stayed together as a family. When I started university, I moved out with my older brother into an apartment, and very promptly after we moved out, my parents moved about 200 kilometers away. So there was no family home to go back to thereafter. And they moved a few more times before they retired. But anyway, so if I visited them, I visited their house, not my home. So you've been here in Lviv certainly long enough to make a home here for a long time. When you go back to Chicago, are you visiting your family house or your home?
So actually, my parents moved. So when I was 3, so I was born in a Ukrainian village in Chicago. When I was 3, we moved to the suburbs, and that was really where, you know, I considered my home in the suburbs. So that's where I spent my childhood. That's where, you know, until I went to college. And after I moved to Ukraine, my parents moved back to the Ukrainian village, and so now when I do go to Chicago, I'm not going to my family home. And I remember that was also kind of a difficult time for me when they were moving out of that house, because I did have a lot of memories, and I knew that when I would be coming to Chicago to visit them, it would no longer be that home. However, they did just preserve a room for me in that new home, because, you know, they knew that I'd be coming often to Chicago. So yeah, so that was so now it's not that family home, but it is in the Ukrainian village still. So there is that connection to the community there. It is technically where I was born. I lived my first 3 years, and I don't remember it. So there's still some sort of, you know, connection to where they're living now, of course. But that kind of that home where I really have all those memories, yeah, and they no longer live there.
Well, yeah, first of all, I'm really happy to see both of you, but especially Marla. We sort of, I didn't know that you are still here, despite of everything. That's really, really great, great to know. I was wondering, when you were speaking about your project, Rohatyn Jewish Heritage, it's obviously a Jewish project, but it's also a Rohatyn project. So we learn a lot about Jewish history, thanks to you, Jewish local history, but also about Rohatyn. And you mentioned that you generated interest among the local population regarding the history of their town or village. So, was there any impact you had on maybe other towns, villages where people said, wow, this is so interesting, someone doing research on this little town, Rohatyn, our town is also great, and let's also study our town. So I think what you do is so important that it could have a larger impact on studying local history in Galicia. Did you discover anything like that beyond Rohatyn? And the second thing, I was a little not surprised, but that you said at the end that the project is, I got the impression that it's sort of stopped or suspended. Why is that the case? Why does the war have this effect? Because for example, here the Center for Urban History, many things still continue, some of them even more vibrant. And the war doesn't stop us. Why do you think that has this kind of negative influence?
I'd like to actually talk about that first. Our project is very physical. So beginning with COVID, really, and then where we are today, up until COVID, every summer we would post on social media, we're looking for volunteers to come with us to Rohatyn, and somewhere between 2 dozen and 3 dozen times over the course of a year, Jay and I would go with a group of people, stay in Rohatyn, clean the cemeteries, clear the mass graves, plant flowers, do minor repairs, whether it was American Peace Corps or just visitors or friends in Lviv or Fulbright Ukraine. And then with COVID, several of these organizations pulled out and they've never come back. So American Peace Corps has never come back in Ukraine. Fulbright Ukraine is not what it was before. And to be quite honest at this point, many volunteers that we've worked with on our project and others in the Lviv Oblast are serving in the military. And if they're not serving in the military, they're out of the country, they can't come back, or they're wanting to avoid being taken into the military. So we've lost all our volunteers. At this point, we've lost our interpreter, our driver, interpreter, friend, and key volunteer. So whenever we go to Rohatyn, and we've only been 4 times this year, we're having to hire a professional driver who's, a driver kind of willing to be an interpreter while we're there, but doesn't have a relationship with the people that we've been meeting with for more than 10 years. So they're not as familiar with our project, and the people in town don't know him. So that kind of rapport that we had built up as a core group, coming, moving, arriving spontaneously because something needs a repair or Jewish headstones have been uncovered in a road and they need to go back, have all been impacted. If you walk around Rohatyn today, it's mostly elderly men and women and children. And even, and Jay wants to say something, and let me just say that it's always been our plan in the long term to pass responsibility for care of the heritage sites to the city, because it's Ukrainian heritage. It may have a Jewish component, but it's Ukrainian cultural heritage. And there are people in town that can use the money, so we raise funds now to have 2 local men care, but one of them is quite elderly, and he's having trouble even finding volunteers helping him at this point. So, and the city is overburdened because its population is 30% higher than it was before the invasion, because it's housing temporarily displaced families and it's schooling them and caring for them. So we want to minimize our impact on pressure, any kind of pressure on the city. Even installing the signs, we had one project, we set our goals on completing one project this year, and that was to put up 2 new signs at the 2 Holocaust mass graves, like the signs we put up last year at the Jewish cemeteries. Just getting people to print the signs, our printers were no longer in business from last year, and then finding installers ended up turning this project into an 8-month planning project. So nothing goes quickly, smoothly, inexpensively, or easily at this point for us.
The projects you're talking about are physical projects, like you said.
It's everything we do is very physical. So we had started shifting a little bit because of COVID and not being on site to doing more desk-based research, working with records, translating testimonies from Yehud and Unum, for example, and Ukrainian sources, German sources, memoirs. We had a memoir published in Ukrainian. This is not something we ordinarily would do. We are an on-the-ground, grassroots, working project that we can't seem to manage anymore.
So we're still able to do digital projects and research projects, but those largely don't need to be done in Rohatyn.
They can be done anywhere.
And Harold asked about other projects that you're aware of in other places.
Right. So, I mean, yeah, they're out there, and they pre-existed and they post-existed. You know, we have a person who asked a question from Canada. We have a friend of ours who's ethnically Canadian, ethnically Ukrainian Canadian, and he purchased his grandmother's house in Tovsta. He's renovating that, but he's also worked at both the Jewish cemetery and the Ukrainian cemetery there, making a database of who's buried there, and it's become like a who's who of the history of Tovsta. And there are other examples of that. The Lviv Volunteer Center through Sasha Nazar at the Jewish community here has had projects that were supposed to happen this summer in both SoCal, a headstone recovery project, which is now on hold. We've created a database project, so we're working online, and frankly tomorrow and the next day we're going to be at the Jewish cemetery here in Lviv photographing headstones that came out of Barvanuk in summer 2018 and then got moved. So anybody wants to join us tomorrow, we're going to be cleaning and photographing headstones for this database. But ordinarily, by this time, we would be involved in a number of on-the-ground projects, and nobody has the manpower at this point to make any of these happen at this point, unfortunately.
Yeah, maybe I will start up. So first of all, I would like to thank both of you, because I am like monitoring and observing your pages and blogs for some time, and I think it's just fascinating that you are doing it not just like in scientific way, but also really digestible for wide audience. And I think it's really it's a big advantage for like also for Ukrainians here to know more about local history. Maybe I will share one story with you. Some years ago, I had a chance here in Lviv, just walking around with one family who came here looking for roots. So it was Jewish family, but like for that time I wasn't not too much maybe in the topic, why they came. Okay, they are just like a tourist, so okay. But during our conversation, I opened to myself really like not just a family story, but the big picture of the free world Lviv, which is my home city and where I was born. I think that personal touch is really important here also for us, like Ukrainians who live here, just to know about the past that was here, which was really complicated, and the comments about it's not easy to come back here, but you know, the story about that family, so the man who actually initiated to come here, his surname, the second, like the family name is Raucher. It was really a big surprise for me that actually he was the first person from whom I get email when the full-scale invasion started. And we were not in a like close touch for a long time, but even not knowing me really well, he was the first person just writing to me and asking if me or my family need any help. And it was so touching and, I don't know, inspiring and empowering in the first days I was here and like all the time I was staying here in Lviv. So I will say that past connect the present and it connects the future, because I think we are all connected all together, and it's like fascinating that you could decide to come back to the city from which your ancestors were like pushed and forced to live, and now you can decide consciously to come back. And I think it's just something like priceless, because unfortunately, yes, there are such places where we can't come back, and as somebody commented before, like some places which are not possible to come back psychologically or physically. And yeah, so once more, sorry for a long comment, I just like appreciate your work and thanks a lot.
Thank you. Really curious who this was.
Did you want to raise your hand before? No? No. Okay.
Питання до пані Kovalska.
The question to Ms. Kovalska, please. The term Galicia, is it used in Poland or is it popular? Because you mentioned the Austrian times, so it made me think that during Austrian times, Galicia, this region, which is now Lviv Oblast and Ternopil Oblast and Ivano-Frankivsk Oblast, and Polish region near Krakow. So do Polish use the term Galicia related to Krakow? And what do you consider about yourself? Is Galicia only Ukrainian or also Polish? Thank you. I don't know which language. In which language do I answer? So in Krakow, yes, it's considered Galicia, Halachina. It was historically the part of Galicia. But now, yes, so yes, it's considered the part of Galicia, even in Poland. I consider myself no borders, the person with no borders. No, I consider myself the Galician Ukrainian, but with American roots. I don't know, it's a little bit of mixture of everything.
Thank you. We have still a few minutes. We have time for a couple of questions, so I encourage you.
Дякую, thank you so much. It's like incredible to see you both together and sharing your amazing story and work. And actually, I do have like one question to Areta, and maybe probably one to both of you. So you've got quite an education on summer camp or Sunday school about Ukraine, and then you started coming here and you started writing. Probably a little bit different story and history of Galician Ukraine, which you were taught, if it was different. I'm curious how was reception of your family and relatives, because it's multicultural, so it's not like Ukrainian, probably it's not too Ukrainian, it's too Ukrainian Galician story that you maybe were taught as a teenager, and then the experience in your own exploration, how it reverberated and changed your community, your family history, and take on the history of Ukraine. So that would be like one question to you, and then the second to both of you is like this moment of encounter in some way, but very specific. You were mentioning specific houses and buildings where your families were either living or related, and do you come in? Do you encounter and talk with people who live there now? If you could share some of this very concrete, not the abstract encounter with really person to person, and would you give any advice? Because I guess that especially for many who are living in the pre-1939 building, at some point somebody may knock, and what do you do? And how you do experience that possibility of encounter. So thank you very much for your work. Amazing.
Thank you. As for the first question, so kind of about how, if I understood correctly, like how my family and my perception of Ukraine and Galicia has changed since I've been living here. Yeah, I mean, I think that. So Galicia, the Galicia that that I learned about in the community it's kind of gone. I mean, that kind of culture that growing up with in Chicago, again going back to the language and the traditions, a lot of that unfortunately has been lost even in Galicia today. I mean, sure, there's still remnants of it, but this part of Ukraine underwent a lot of Russification, Sovietization, and so on. So it's very different. I'm going back to a place that's very different than the place that my grandparents left. But there is, of course, I mean, we still have a lot of family here, so there's still this connection, and of course there is still, a lot of those traditions still have survived. But the country is very different, and my parents were at first a little bit concerned about my move to Ukraine, and a little bit worried that I moved into I started visiting before, and by 2011 things were improving a little bit, but it was still very difficult the first right after the Soviet Union fell. But eventually I think they thought it was really interesting that I was here. They have this connection. I think also with my community in Chicago, the people that I'm still in touch with, or when I'm in Chicago and they see me, they're always very fascinated to talk to me and to hear about my experiences in Ukraine, especially now after the war. So I've kind of become this bridge between the Ukrainian community in Chicago and the Ukrainian community and Ukraine. But I think a lot of the Ukrainians from the community that haven't been to Ukraine don't really quite understand what Ukraine is today, and I think that's something that I learned after spending a lot of time here. That what Ukraine today is very different, but with some of those traditions. But it's a modern country. It's not that Ukraine or that Galicia that once was. And as for the second question about physical homes, I have never, I'm thinking of other examples. There's a house in Libuchora in the Carpathians where my family lived in my father's side, and it's now the Siska Rada or Siska Budinok in the village. That's like the village council, and we visited it, but I think it was closed at that time, so we couldn't go inside, unfortunately. But I think they also even built that home as well. This was probably in the 1910s, 1920s. That's when my grandfather was born. So we've definitely visited that home, and that was a really cool experience. I don't know if no one's living there. And in Bra, the house was destroyed. And in Lviv, also have a few different connections. So the house in Kovalska, but also actually down the street from where I live, there was a family, pretty well famous Ukrainian community, Stepan Fedak. He was a lawyer. And his son, I think, was Stepan Fedak. Anyways, so they were pretty active in the Ukrainian community before World War II, and my great aunt was living in Lviv in the interwar period, studying at the medical university. She was living with them, and it's just literally down the street from me. So it's also, there's actually a plaque on that building to say that the Fedak family lived there, and so that's also. But there's just all these connections, and every time I pass it, I'm always thinking about it. But I've never actually gone into these homes or been able to talk to people that live in any of these places.
Where my grandmother was born in Rohatin was absolutely burned to the ground when the Russians left World War I, with the exception of the Rinnik and the buildings right around it. But where my grandmother was born on Volova and the Grand Synagogue it was absolutely burned to the ground. So what's been rebuilt in that area is not identical. There are more buildings there now than there were previously. But whenever I walk it, I become friends with the people that do live there. And whenever I'm there, I visit in particular one woman who lives right across the street from what would have been the, I mean, it's not a street, it's a dirt road, but right across from the Grand Synagogue, and she inherited her house, and it's the only pre-World War I house on Belova today. She inherited from her mother, and her mother told her a Jewish family had lived there, and the synagogue was across the street, so there's that. But there is a house off the Rinnek that did survive because it wasn't burned to the ground, and my family had a restaurant and they lived upstairs. And Jay's going to have to correct me, in 2012 maybe, we had a French documentary film crew come for France 24. And we were one segment of a, I don't know, hour and a half or 2 hour thing where they followed a friend of ours to Romania, and we were Ukraine, and they followed us to Rohatin, and we tapped at the door and the people let us in, and we filmed inside, and they were very interested in, you know, what our interest was in the building. We tried to get into the basement because there was this long-standing family story that's been corroborated by others about members of my family that hid down there during the war and were denounced ultimately and shot and killed on the Rinnek, but it was witnessed by a lot of people. So I wanted to see the basement because apparently it was one of the few houses in town that had running water at that time. So they were able to survive down there for a while. But it's the only time I have gone in. But we have been to Rohatin with other descendants who have pointed out, and we've said, let's go knock at the door, and the residents kind of recognized me from social media, from Facebook, and yeah, come on in, you know. And so we've been into a couple of places, and this one woman, she was, correct me if I'm wrong, Jay, it was Bernice, right? Bates? Yeah, and she's in her 90s, and she was born in that house. So, she knew exactly, and it's on Ivan Franco, and she knew her way around the house and everything. Oh, this used to be the living room and my bedroom and this and that. And the people that lived there were fascinated to meet her, and she's Australian, if I remember. She had this wonderful Australian accent. And anyway, it was really quite fabulous to witness that, because she's an original, right? I'm not. I'm a derivative, so.
Thank you both. We have to finish on a positive note. That is good. Thank you all for coming. I mentioned that we will have a next event, which is part of this series, next week at 6:30. It's a lecture by Alexander Martin Kisley from Kyiv about Crimean Tatars and also
what day? What day?
It's Наступний четвер. And I forgot to mention that you can see part of the exhibit by Kovalska here on the left side. No storks here, but other birds and other animals. Дякую всім, були дуже раді вас бачити, і ця програма буде потім записана.
We were glad to see you. This program will be later on YouTube, and you will be able to watch it again. Thank you.